thanks for joining this week for our weekly interlude with Seattle Chamber Music Society. This week we are joined by prize-winning cellist, frequent recitalist, soloist, as well as chamber musician who's joined us here several times at the Seattle Chamber Music Society. We have Cameron Crozman today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. First of all, we always like to check you're staying well. You're doing as well as can be at this time. Healthy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm up here and I'm in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. And yeah, it's staying as well as I can anyways, making a lot of good food, which is
That's good.
one of the nice
Yeah.
things.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. So you're in Montreal. Were you home when everything started to shut down, or were you out on the road? And
Yeah, so I was actually really close to you guys. I was on Vancouver Island. I was
Okay.
supposed to be playing Beethoven Triple Concerto, actually. It was going to be my first triple. And basically the shutdown happened the day of the first rehearsal. We had a little trio rehearsal and then the orchestra rehearsal got canceled. So ended up spending a couple more days on the island, and that was sort of my last leg of that. I was doing a tour in British Columbia, so that was the last leg. So luckily I didn't need to adjust travel plans. It was sort of, honestly, it was really funny because at the time, I think on Vancouver Island, they had one case or something like this. And I had taken an extra day for myself just to drive around the island a bit. And I just remember walking, in these amazing forests that you have on the West Coast, right? And being like, man, I just want to stay here. I don't want to go back to the big city out east.
I know, we talked to Andrew Wan a little earlier
Mm.
in our series here, and he said Montreal was kind of the Canadian hotspot, or the epicenter of it in Canada. Is it still a big concern? Have they started to relax some of the stay-at-home orders, or?
They're very slowly starting to. It is the Canadian city with sort of the highest amount of cases and of all that. So what they've actually been doing is they've been considering Montreal sort of separate from the rest of the province. And so Montreal has been slowly reopening. I think now businesses are allowed to open if they have a storefront with a door, but there's still a lot of things which we're still waiting on. So
Yeah,
hopefully
that
it
makes
won't be too
sense.
much longer, but you need to stay
Safety
safe about
first.
these things. Safety first.
Exactly. James just this week announced, or I guess last week, that the summer festival will continue in a virtual format this summer, knowing that folks like you up in Canada can't cross the border yet. Um, I know that the talk was that you were going to get together with Andrew Wan. The two of you were going to get together and play something. So, what's your plan for the summer for the festival?
So we're going to be playing the Ravel duo for violin and cello. Fantastic piece, and it's very fitting because with last summer when I was in Seattle, I got to play the Kodai duo with James out in the park, and so I feel like I'm doing all the violin cello duos maybe one of these days. So that should be fun. We're still working out the logistics of how we're actually going to record that, but that's sort of the interesting part of the whole thing. Really nice for me. I've really missed playing with other people in
Yeah,
person.
seems like that's one of the things that
I'm
echoes over and
sure.
over is, it looked like there was a performance that came out. I guess we're still in May for this interview, but earlier this month, a piece by Ludovic Einaudi,
Yeah.
the canto, beautiful, beautiful piece. And so I'm curious, what made you decide to perform that, to record it, and to
Mm.
share it for folks?
Yeah, actually, so that was interesting. So that was it was my label here in Montreal, Atma Classique, who had asked me, yeah, back in the fall that they had decided they wanted to do this album of Ludovico Einaudi's chamber music because right now he's really well known as this sort of I guess we call it ambient classical music, which I feel like is not the nicest term for it because it's actually very powerful stuff. It's not just not just music for background. But he wrote some chamber music when he was younger. He was actually a student of Luciano Berio. So he had real compositional training. And so they put together this really fun CD. The canto is all I play on it. It's just a short piece. But it came out, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago or something like that. The actual CD was released. And before that, CBC, actually, I was doing something for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation here. And they were looking for a little, sort of more I guess, quote unquote, accessible piece of music that they could play on one of their shows. And so I said, oh, well, I have this CD coming out. I'll just tape this. And I just happen to have a couple cameras at home. So I threw them all up and recorded and played through it a couple times. So yeah, that was actually fun to do that little project.
you did have multiple cameras, which is kind of a rarity, it seems like, for this moment. It seems like we're fixed and this is the view we get. So is this,
Yeah.
something that is important to you, or is it just sort of happenstance that you had multiple cameras, or are you really focused on like the technical components to make it a dynamic performance, I guess?
That's a great question. Yeah, I was lucky in that I had had sort of a prior interest in both audio engineering. I actually took an audio engineering class in my first year at school, and also in photography. And then, of course, sort of you when you're into photography, you always get into sort of cinematography afterwards. And so that's why I was lucky. I had a couple different lenses and a couple different cameras laying around, just from having done, just from personal interest. And yeah, I think it matters a lot. I think especially just what you said, we're always looking at each other this way, right? The sort of video conference style. And for me anyways, just even editing it together, it was really refreshing to have some sort of more artistic angles to work with. And what I'm happy about, I'm actually doing a couple more videos like that coming up.
The future ones, is that for another project, or is it just sort of something fun to do to keep you busy and out of trouble?
It is an extra project actually that is also coincidentally keeping me out of trouble. It's for the Canadian Cultural Center in Paris. I went to school in Paris at the conservatory for 6 years. And so uh, more recently, actually, I've developed quite a very nice relationship with the Canadian Cultural Center there. And they send me an email. July 1st is our national holiday, Canada Day. And they're putting together, I guess, with all the European embassies, sort of this big sort of musical celebration for all of the Canadians in Europe who aren't able to be back in Canada for the celebrations. And they asked me to record a couple things. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of Bach on one video, and another one, a specific request, is Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, which I've been having a lot of fun also learning and arranging and figuring out what I'm going to do with it. So yeah, personally, that's what I found really interesting about this time, is just finally having that time, that because it's not this touring pace where you're always traveling and everything, there's actually time to sit back and say, oh, I've always thought it'd be interesting to really learn, how to play some of this more popular music and what goes into it, because there's a real art to it as well. And it's been nice to actually be able to sit down and say, okay, I'm not just going to make a hack arrangement of it. I'm going to make a proper arrangement and figure out how to do it well.
That's great. So it sounds like you're keeping yourself pretty busy. Or are you just playing stuff for fun? Are you, it sounds like you're exploring some new things, but are there
Yeah.
other things that you're diving into that you've always wanted to kind of dig deeper into, or like?
Yeah, musically, again, I'm actually really lucky, because one of the first things that ended up lining up was my label again happened. They had artists that had to cancel on them because they lived in Europe or United States and couldn't travel. And so it turned out that they had these sort of open slots, and I had a recording program ready to go. So in August, I'm recording a new CD, which is really exciting,
Great.
of all Spanish music, because I play on this wonderful Spanish cello on loan from the Canada Council for the Arts. And so it's the concept is sort of like a musical tapas, lots of little pieces, lots of different flavors of what we think of as Spanish culture. So that's been really fun. Again, like, it's a real world to dive into.
Yeah.
After that, though, that's where the question marks start for me once the fall hits. At least here in Canada, it does look like this is going to at least continue till the new year. And so, yeah, thinking of new things to do, but it is sometimes hard when it's that far out, I think, too. My dad is also sort of in the music industry, and every now and then we call each other up and throw out crazy ideas. And he had noticed how a lot of the sports teams were basically creating their own little mini communities within themselves so that they could still play, hockey games or football games or whatever, right? Just for empty stadiums. And we were thinking, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we just got like a team of musicians together and locked them up in some retreat or
Some
something and made them put on a
enclave
festival.
somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if
All
that
the
will happen, but it would be fun if we find a way to sort of have projects come out of collaboration again.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a question too. So, this was obviously a solo thing for the Einaudi that you had
Hmm.
performed. Are there things that you're doing that are collaborative? I know your work with Andrew coming up. Have you
Hmm.
have you ventured into those opportunities to try to partner with musicians?
I've just dipped my toes into it. I haven't really initiated any of them, but I had a very good friend of mine in France who had been doing little videos. And so we recorded a little piece together for two cellos, but I think it was not the best choice of piece. It was this really early sort of canon for two cellos, and it was just a pain. I had to go back in and the audio software and like line things up manually. So Yeah, it's really not the same. So like, I'm doing them when I'm asked to do them because it's fun, and I want
Yeah,
to still give music for people to listen to. But yeah, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't really capture the same
yeah,
spirit as when it's in person. So I haven't done too much of it this week. Coming up for a festival here out east in Halifax, they've turned their festivals into a basically 2 weeks of every night they're doing a broadcast. Some of it's live. They set up a room in Halifax to do live recordings. And some of it is sort of previous broadcasts from previous festivals that they recorded. But I get to do a special night on Wednesday where I get to host my own evening right here in my apartment. So it's going to be a little bit of me playing, a little bit of me, playing some clips that were recorded a couple of years ago, and then getting on Zoom and chatting with one of my colleagues. So that should be fun
nice.
as well, I think.
Yeah, that's great. It feels like community is so important right now, and the
Mhm.
arts are one of these things that really are able to bring community together. So, thank you for that work that you're doing.
I
It's
think one of
terrific.
the interesting things I've found over this time is, even though we say the internet, oh, it's this huge market, everyone's on the internet, right? And so you could reach everyone in the world with your video. But I think what's also really interesting that I've seen with internet is it's revealed a lot of small communities around,
Hmm.
maybe 200 or 300 people that go to this festival usually that instead are watching things. And I think that's really special too, is to have these little, yeah, like in you guys are doing here with Seattle too, these little enclaves of the internet, which are sort of reserved for these little communities that already know each other and that want to keep on interacting.
I was looking at your YouTube page and I saw, there's some videos that are a few years old, but I thought they were fascinating. They were, there was a Bach, a Penderecki, a Hindemith. I
Mm.
might be missing another one, but there were performances in these very non-traditional kind of spaces, whether it's out in the woods or kind of on the street. Was that something that you really wanted to do, or kind of projects come about?
Yeah, for sure. Oh no, those were really fun actually. So that was like in the first year that I got into this whole idea, like, photography, cinematography, all this idea. And it also happened to be the year where I had this Stradivarius cello on loan from the Canada Council, which I think I had the first time I came to Seattle. And the first summer there was, I think I had a period in August where I wasn't very busy. And so I decided, what I would do is I went and rented some nice mics. I knew how to do some audio editing. So I recorded each of those pieces at home, just in like a room, edited them all up. And then with my dad's help, actually went out into these locations. And basically I had like a boom box just out of shot, right? Blasting this music of me playing. I played back to it and then edit it, mostly because at the time I didn't have a lot of videos, didn't have a lot of self-promotion videos. And I knew that was something I wanted to be sending out to people now that I had the Stradivarius and everything. And yeah, that was sort of like, I think that was a week, and it was just really fun. And very memorable too, because I think, especially the Bach, which is sort of filmed in this forest, which is actually just off of a road, but you
You'd
don't need
never
to know
know.
that, right?
Yeah, we would
When you're
never know.
watching it.
That's the
But
magic of cinema.
exactly. It was one of the hottest days of the summer. Like it was well over 100 degrees. And I just remember I was glad that at least there was the shade of the trees. And then I think the Penderecki, we filmed at like 1 a.m. or something like this. But it was so much fun because it is that real memorable, you know, crazy thing you just decide to do one week.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned it. So you used to play on a Stradivarius that was on loan.
Mhm.
You've got a new instrument, a different instrument. It's El Tiburon, is that correct? Is kind of the
Yeah, that's the
name
name. It means the
for it?
shark in Spanish.
Yeah, yeah. So how was it to have to give back an instrument that you've been using, and what's it been like? I know you've had it now for a little while, but
Mhm.
what's that process of getting familiar with a new cello?
I mean, it's always a challenge. I think that's one of that is the most difficult thing about this bank we have. We have these amazing instruments here in Canada available to loan out, but they're only for 3 years, so you have to give them back. And definitely with the Strat, it was hard because I really felt like the last day I had it, I played Schumann Concerto for a summer festival here, and that was the day where I still felt it sounded the best.
Hmm.
And I felt like I had 2 or 3 more years worth of sort of like opening up and discovering to do with that instrument. But sometimes life is, the relationships only last that long. And what was actually interesting is that in between the two, there was a month where I went back to my own cello, which I own. I have a modern cello by a Canadian maker. And it was very interesting to get to know that instrument again, first of all, and to really sort of go back to that after having played such a great instrument and realizing, oh, I understand how to play this instrument better as well. And yeah, coming to the Spanish cello now, I've really been enjoying it. It's a very different beast, but it's the type of cello, whereas the Strat, it was much more of a sort of journey of discovery, I felt. This instrument much more sort of, it almost came to the table with something already made. It had this such a distinctive sound, a very sort of like rich, husky voice. And so for me, it was much more about learning to play with that and learning what type of new colors would come from that. And I feel like this cello, in a way, tells very much its story, whereas the Strat is sort of like this had this beauty of infinite possibilities.
Hmm.
So, but both
Nice.
amazing in their own way. At
Yeah.
least now, at least I have to say, back when I played on the Strat, I didn't even own a bow. They had loaned me a bow as well. So at least now I own a bow. So I'm halfway there, question mark, maybe.
You talked about too here, or alluded to it. So you went to school in Paris. What made you decide to, go overseas?
There was a couple things. I actually went to school in French here. My parents don't speak French, but they were very smart. When I was young, they put me in a French immersion school. So there was that already. There was that, I think, first of all, that idea that there was the possibility. And then it just so happened that I met my teacher who teaches here in Canada in the summers. And he sort of proposed the idea to me when I was still a teenager. He's like, why don't you come audition for Paris? Of course, it's always funny reflecting back, like when you're a teenager, you think you're so smart and you've got everything figured out, right? And in retrospect, I was so set at that time, like when I'd sort of gotten into my mind, oh, I could go study in Paris. And I was a real sort of bookish teenager as well. So I was reading lots of French literature and dreaming of Paris and all this. And so I had my mind like completely set on that I was going to go to Paris or I wasn't going to do anything. And that was like actually the only school I auditioned for. And yeah, that's, I think, what I was obviously very set on, that idea that I wanted to be in Paris for its culture and for all that. At the same time, it was very much a culture shock. Europe isn't North America, and there's a whole bunch of stuff to get used to. And, even as a Canadian who speaks French, you're still a foreigner, right? But you can at least speak the language, so that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was just an incredible experience culturally, right? Like the music comes from there, and to be able to play some Ravel or Debussy and then go down to one of the museums and look at all the great impressionists was incredible.
You've been cooking a lot of good food. Are there other things that, while you're at home, you're diving into books on the bookshelf, or binge watching things, or cooking through everything in a cookbook, or how else are you spending your time these days?
Yeah, definitely a little bit of all of that. I've definitely started working on the bookshelf. As you can see, I have a few books, and for a while I didn't have any of them with me. Last year, I spent the entire year on the road, so I didn't have access to any of these books. So it's been nice to get back to them, and I have a equal sort of amount in French and in English. So I've been trying to sort of go back and forth. And otherwise, yeah, cooking. I've actually gotten really into tea. I always liked tea, like Chinese loose leaf and Japanese teas. But I never sort of was into it as intensely as I am right now. And it just turns out that one of the best tea shops in Montreal was literally like a 5-minute walk from me, and it never closed. It was
Great.
somehow an essential service. So it was great because I went and was able to buy a whole bunch of tea. And so that's been really enjoyable, just learning about this whole ceremony of tea. And there's all these different teapots for different teas and different temperatures of water. And so that's been sort of one of those cool rabbit holes I've been able to go down.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, cooking, I have a couple cookbooks. Mostly I've been alternating between Spanish food, because I love Spanish food, as might be obvious by this point, and Indonesian food. My grandmother was Dutch, but grew up in Indonesia when it was still a Dutch colony. And so Indonesian food was sort of always part of just the routine for me growing up. But I, of course, never learned how to cook it until more recently. And it's a fascinating cuisine because it sort of mixes a lot of the different Asian influences into one thing. And it's absolutely delicious. So that's been really fun, just sort of alternating between all those and having a time to actually think about it.
Could you set up a schedule for yourself? Or did you, when this first happened, did you take a little bit of time off? Did you think like, I got to keep going and come up with these projects?
That's a really good question. And actually, I found that things have changed a lot. And I find that for me, time right now really seems to go in waves. And there's waves where I'm just very motivated, and I do actually set myself a schedule, and I say, I've got to be doing this, 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 and I want to be working on whatever. And I'll write out like, here's the, 10 things I need to do, and I need to spend half an hour on them every day. And then other times, more recently, I feel it's been very free flowing. But right when it happened, I think that was sort of one of the more interesting times, because at the time we still didn't know how long it was going to last, right? I thought maybe we'd be back to normal by June or something, right? And so I was still practicing. There was still stuff to work on. And actually, what I decided to do at the time was something I'd always wanted to do for a long time, which is uh, when I was in Paris, took some Alexander technique classes.
Mm.
And for anyone who doesn't know what Alexander technique is, it's sort of this mind body wellness type of thought uh, school, I guess you could say. It's a similar to Pilates in a way, or Feldenkrais is another technique. And it's all about this whole idea that it's possible to be aware of your body in such a way to use it in a very efficient way. So it ends up getting applied a lot to musicians or to actors, sometimes to athletes. And my Alexander technique had always said, if you want to do this properly, you need to take 2 months off and just do Alexander technique and play scales. Right. Of course, he tells someone this like as they're preparing for their master's recital. And I was sure that I was never going to get to that point, but that's pretty much what I did. I didn't quite make 2 months, but I did a whole month of that, just really going back to basics and really sort of re-examining my approach to the cello. And that was, I felt, really useful and really just good on so many levels, spiritually as well, in a way.
Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time this afternoon. We're very much
No problem.
we're looking forward to, a digital performance. We can't wait to actually have you
Yes.
back here in Seattle with us, but we're definitely very excited that the music is going to go on and that you're going to be a part of that this summer. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy that it's worked out this way, and that you and the team and at the festival and James have managed to put this together. It's going to be really, really fun. I'm looking forward to it. Definitely. And I think it'll be very memorable. And that's something I find myself personally missing a little bit in these times. Nothing stands out anymore when you're so used to traveling all the time, right?
Yeah.
And to have these type of experiences, I think we're going to remember them in the future, and that will be fun.
Yeah.